People, it is compressor time. Walrus Audio has yet again another compressor. I mean, there was the deep thing and there was like 3 versions of it, but what was it called? I don't remember, but it was like 3 versions and must still be around. The one we're looking at now is a little bit more complex. So, you know, how about you get a cup of coffee and for the next couple of minutes we talk about optical studio type compressors. And if that's just totally boring to you, skip that section to me playing. But here it is, the MIra, which looks all about like, here's a keyhole and we're going to heaven religious kind of thing. Or I'll tend to ignore that because boo. So, this confused me. This makes sense. Everything else makes sense. This for bass. Okay, now you know. Let's skip the attack and release for now. What's compression? I do this in every compressor video because some of you don't know, and people are usually grateful. So my level, when I'm playing clean, primarily clean, because on guitar, drive sounds from an amp or a pedal are usually compressed, squished together, blocky. When you look at a waveform, very blocky anyway. But clean sounds are all spiky. They've got all these attacks and these transients. So a clean sound is very loud at the beginning and then very quickly goes down. Now a driven sound is more sustained. Okay, that's why we like to play with drives, because it's much easier, because the notes there longer. So how do we get clean sounds to be more sustaining and also more heard in the mix? Well, we crank them up, right? We get the whole thing louder. The problem is our attacks are already very loud. And how do we tame those? Well, we tell it, the compressor, the box. As soon as a signal comes in, look at the level. If the level is more than this, it's this. Reduce it. Completely reduce it to not get louder than this would mean limiting. We might be able to do this by cranking this up. Can we? Let me check the manual. Highest ratio is 20:1. Pretty high, still not limiting, but okay. So limiting would be as much as I give in, it just doesn't get louder than what I set it at. A 2:1 ratio would be anything above this threshold that I set, okay? Anything louder will only get louder half as much as I get louder. So if I'm going bang and I'm going 10 louder, a 2:1 will give me half of that. It will give me 5 louder. 5 loudernesses values. Let's not talk in dBs and whatever, okay? A 4:1 will cut it by 3/4, meaning I would only get 2.5 out of my original 10 volumes. A 20:1 mathematically should mean I'm only getting half of it, I think. So I put in 10 volumes, 10 loudernesses, but I'm only getting a half louder. So it is still getting louder than this threshold that I set. Anything above the threshold is still getting louder than the threshold. I'm still doing this, but instead of doing this, I'm doing this, okay? I'm reducing the louder gettering. I set this by the threshold, so anything above this level will be affected. Anything under, the damn compressor does nothing. Ratio does, how much is it louder gettering? You know, am I compressing only a little bit, 2:1? Or 20:1, or anything in between? So, I'm reducing the level. I have not yet made the whole thing louder. But that's what we wanted to do, right? We wanted to get the clean guitar more out of the mix by cranking it up. So I'm taming the attacks, my transients, so they are not so spiky and loud anymore. And now I can get everything up so that I can hear it, right? That is makeup gain. So let's say right about here, nothing would change. I crank it up a little bit, and now my whole wave comes up. That also will make it sound like I have more sustain, when in reality I do not. It is a perceived more sustain. Why? Well, my sustain, I'm over here and I'm going, pow, and I'm going quiet, right? And all the quiet stuff is not really audible in the mix. Now my big thing is reduced by 4-1. And now everything can go up. And all of a sudden the quiet stuff back here isn't really that quiet anymore. It's back here because I made it louder. And that will mean it sounds like you can hear it longer you can hear it longer because I made it louder. So instead of actually making the quiet stuff a lot louder, I make the loud stuff quiet so that everything can come up. That's what a compressor does, and that's why it sounds like there's more sustain. Blend would, with 50-50, for example, still blend it with my original signal. So I actually have those spikes, and I've got my attack and my pa-pam, pa-pam, pa-pam for the slappiness on the bass or whatever. So my attack is still kind of there, but I'm blending in the loudness. I'm blending in my sustain, which means for bass, that's a good idea. For guitar, I don't know. I would go all the way full. Now, level on this thing confuses me because I have makeup gain. So whatever level I lost, I make up. And now I've got an overall level, which in reality is this. So having these two is confusing me a little bit. I don't think it's necessarily necessary. Now it gets complicated. Attack and release, which is something studio compressors have. And this is where this really differs to, like, for example, the Carl Martin Honeycomb, which got 3 knobs. The original has 2. Or the diver one from Walrus. What is it? The diver thing? I can't remember what it's called. That compressor. This is more complicated. Attack. If my attack is immediate, everything is as I explained. If I have my attack later, what happens is, as soon as it detects me hitting the threshold level, so the loud thing where I said, please compress now, it will wait a bit and then compress. What's the benefit of this? Well, the benefit is my transients, my spikes at the beginning are still there. When I said in the beginning, I really want to tame those. Well, maybe I don't. Maybe I just want the sustain. So the spikes will come through, and right after the spike, a little bit, this is where the spike is, so a little bit after, the compressor does its job. So the spike triggers the threshold, it's above it, but the compressor is not acting. Once it is over, the compressor acts, blows up the signal, okay? So I've got all my attackiness while still having my louder making of the stuff that comes after. Now, here's my wave. When it falls under the threshold. Now, as soon as it falls under the threshold, right? Now it's under the threshold. But I want all that stuff to be loud. Well, once it falls under the threshold, the compressor technically isn't doing anything anymore. So I could tell it, well, once it falls under the threshold, do your thing a little bit longer. So that all my quiet shit is also being blown up. Now, if my release is immediate, as soon as it falls under the threshold, compressor doesn't do anything. So all my quiet stuff isn't sustainy or louder and comes out in the mix. However, if I crank up my release time, that means once I fall under that threshold, it's saying, oh, we'll wait another half a second before we actually turn the compressor off, or however long. So that means with a longer release, the compressor will hold on to the volume pump upness. So if you want your spikies to be there, longer attack. If you want all the quiet stuff, once you fall under the threshold, to be more audible, longer release. That's what a studio compressor does. That's what the MIra does. That's complicated. Setting up a compressor like this is a pain in the... I was going to say pain in the dick, but you don't say that. It's a pain in the ass. I apologize for the rudeness. Iced Coffee by Moin Coffee, which are not sponsoring me, but I'm going to have a talk with them. So, now we get some sound. By the way, if you're working with quite a bit of gain, tube amp or pedal, you don't really need a compressor. This is clean shit. And this is a valiant soothsayer in my spec with a P90 from Bare Knuckle and a humbucker. What a brilliant guitar. Wangy neck with maple stripes, locking tuners from Goto. Look how cool that sits in here. And if you've seen the video about this guitar and its sister, you can now know, or you should know, that you can buy 2 more of each model from Valiant Guitars. Check it out on Reverb and on their website. So they built it based on my spec in exactly that color, exactly this guitar with the wangy neck and the maple fretboard. You can get from Valiant. But that's it for now. So here's the Tone King Sky King, clean, no compression, with this thing. And you can see on the light what the compression's doing. I'm above the threshold when it lights up. You can see how it takes time to erlöschen in German. To Leslie, please. To deluminate.
To dim down.
To dim down, thank you. See how it's holding on? Pretty much exactly what's happening. If you're new to compression, don't get a MIra, because it is quite complicated to set up. So, okay, threshold goes kind of the other way. So right now it's not doing anything. I'm still making up gain, but I'm actually not compressing, so everything's just quite a bit louder. Now I'm compressing quite a bit. Look at the light. Now I fell under the threshold. If I increase, the buzz, by the way, is the P90. It's not the pedal. If I increase release, that rhymes. Once it falls under the threshold, I should have quite a bit more sustain. Compressing more now. And you see, I'm really hitting it, but I'm not getting more level out of it. I'm gonna play very delicately, and you're gonna find out, can't really get it quiet. less ratio. I have a little bit more dynamic control because it's squishing less. Yeah, definitely more dynamic. Now it's compressing the living crap out of my signal. So those knobs are interdependent. They, you know, you have more ratio, but then it squeezes more. So maybe you could release a little bit on your threshold, which also then, of course, make up gain. And it can get very complicated. Get the attack back. Now it immediately feels as if when I'm hitting, as if that's what it's doing, that when I'm hitting, it's not doing something immediately. Also sounds fatter. Why? Well, simple reason. All this quiet stuff in the tone is louder, therefore more information, therefore fat. So let's compress quite a bit. But only blend it in. So right now, we do a mix. Is the button pushed in? It was. It did sound a little bit as if the top end sounds different when it was on, which technically it shouldn't. But on the side, there is a high-pass filter. So that's a sidechain, meaning it will only be the high frequencies triggering the compressor. So that your low frequencies, which are usually louder and have more energy, don't continuously go boom, boom, boom. Well, right now, we disengage that. So a sidechain actually is the thing that the threshold looks at. So the threshold will look at it with more bass or all the full range signal. And if I push this in now, it will only look at the higher frequencies. Where that crossover frequency is, we don't know. A sidechain could, in Studio Compressors, also look at something completely different. It could look at a kick drum or at a vocal. So every time the vocal comes in, and it's only looking at the vocal, it could actually push down and compress the guitar. So therefore, every time the vocalist sings, the guitar gets ducked down a bit. That's an option. So here it's so that the low frequencies don't completely, trash it. But let's see. Now it's just compressing actually more because the low frequencies are powerful. I have to say though, it is not fully transparent. Let's see. When it's on, it sounds a tiny little bit different. But I mean, you kind of want it to sound different because otherwise, why get a freaking pedal if you don't want your sound to sound different? So I like compressors that boost the top end a little bit. Let's do this with the full spectrum. Oh, it's compressing quite a bit more because of the low end. Soft clicky, by the way. It's the kind of pedal that realistically, sound-wise, I always want to have on because I like the sound. I like the boosted top end. It's just more fun to play with the compressor, especially when it's playing clean. Mixed in. Let's see what I would do to get more sustain, more compression. So the low gain overdrive, like the 1987. Tone gone. So the MIra Walrus audio right there. Now you've learned something about compression, studio compression. Optical compression is what this does. What does it mean? I have no freaking idea. If that's what you want, go for it. You have complete control like on a studio compressor. I recommend don't get this pedal if you don't already understand what compression does, because you're going to fiddle around with the knobs and you're going to fiddle yourself to death. Attack and release is a little bit of a complex concept. You have to imagine what the wave does. Get a simpler compressor if you're new to compression. If you know what compression does, and if you understand the controls as I explained them to you, and you have a studio compressor or you're working with them in the DAW, and you want that very specific fine-tunability on your board, there are very few that will give you this. I think there's a Keeley Compressor Pro, bigger pedal that has all the controls. There are few that give you that much control. So this is a like compression Swiss Army knife kind of a thing where you can really dial in exactly what you want. I want this much attack, but I want the release to be this long. Some of you want to stomp in the compressor and there's just more of your guitar and it's longer. That's good. There are other boxes that will do this. This you have to understand and control. Don't fiddling with the knobs to have some fun can very quickly just get you a super compressed signal that doesn't even come out of your mix because you didn't know what you were doing. So proceed with caution. If you know that you know enough, MIra's for you. I don't think it's the pedal for the novice compressor connoisseur. Thanks, Walrus Audio, for commissioning this video, as always. You knew I'd make it complicated, but that's why you hire me. Links below, and we'll put animals at the end, as freaking always.
It's getting ridiculous. Afraid of the obvious. We ignore that it's better to leave now than not at all. And silence is killing us. I guess we just talked too much before, and it's better to leave now than not at all. You believe it's easy? Who said it would be? The truth never is, but you gotta release me. No need to talk, 'cause silence is bliss. Let's not go back to where we started.